Welcome. Welcome to the 3-year celebration of Patreon with Stash Weisslouch. Quick tips, supplemental materials, and more. How's everybody doing today? All right. No real agenda here, just sipping on some Trader Joe's seltzer, reflecting on 3 years of quick tips and good times. Patreon.com/StashWeisslouch. We got more than 100 patrons going. Thank you so much to those here who are part of the Patreon crew. What can be said? It's a heck of a deal, I think. For $7 a month, you get access to hundreds, maybe thousands of hours worth of work putting in these lessons together, filming, planning. It's a labor of love. I wouldn't do it if I didn't love it, but I do appreciate the support. Something I've spoken about before. We'll just do a little mini workshop style here. Getting comfortable with the neck. Something I just love is playing the triads. So I've always done root position triads. For example, playing the key of G. You play the one, you decide a position. Play the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3 chord, the 4 chord, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then go down. Just switch the order. Still a 5 chord, but now in reverse direction. 4, 3, 2, 1, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pretty cool. It's crazy. If you just count the tempo at something like, I don't know, 60 beats per minute, you're doing eighth notes. Playing the scale doesn't seem so bad. Play the triads. Everything feels really fast. But the reality of it is, that's a great way to start introducing new intervals into the scale in a really musical way. That's a very pleasant sounding thing. Now I'm doing 16th notes against the 60 beats, but just wanted to get the point across. Forces you to do new fingerings in the scale, so you're not just relying on the same old fingering all the time, and gives you a new opportunity to make some nice melodies. Just make melodies using scale and triads, 3 and 4 and. In the context of a fiddle tune, make up a melody. opens it way up. So if you actually go through this exercise and just play the triads up and down, whatever scale, I promise you, you will be much more fluent in that scale, and no possibilities, new melodies will appear. It's just like that. I'm giving you the instant cure for your melodic woes. Play triads. I learned a new scale, Dorian, A Dorian. Thanks to Quick Tips 90, 91, 92, 93, Stash Weisslouch and his Patreon has forced me to learn A Dorian. Okay, I learned to play it up and down, maybe even in a few positions. 1 D, first finger on the D string. Everything sounds like a scale. My solution, played in triads. Dorian, what's the 1 triad? 1 minor. What's the 2 triad? 2 minor. 3 triad or flat 3 triad, major. 4 triad, major. 5 minor, 6 diminished. Flat 7, major. Yes. Yes, please. So all of a sudden I'm seeing the Dorian as its own thing in triads. Now I want to put it on the neck. Yeah. If you did this in all your major positions, the fingering and everything will look pretty familiar. But now you're looking at it from a whole new framework. Net result, you know the scale better. For those of you just joining us, here we are celebrating 3 years of Patreon with what we do best at Stash Weisslouch Patreon, and that is give workshops and teach music. If it were up to me, we'd all be together in a physical space. We do a little bit of teaching, a little bit of workshop. Maybe people who are specialized in other things would give little presentations on things of interest in their circle, and then we'd have these nice jam sessions, little duets we create, trios, full band things. So I don't know, maybe this Patreon one day will turn into a full-blown camp. Projecting that here, 3-year anniversary, 3 years. Patreon.com/StashWeisslouch. We're talking about triads. You know, I'm obsessing about this Slipstream tune. In fact, we've done 4 quick tips on it when the 4th one comes out in a few days. And I think I will be okay on Slipstream for at least a few months. So I'm probably not going to play it. I'm so sick of the tune as much as I love it. Only because I've spent a lot of time with it. The A part, just Dorian. I talk about the quick tip saying, make melodies in it. This is a nice way to make 8th note melodies. Just combine the triads existing. Alrighty, since we're just riffing here, actually, let me hold it. I don't want to give away all the goodies in the first 10 minutes. Any questions, thoughts? This is also a Q&A session / glorious celebration of 3 years of Patreon. I think there might be a delay in the chat, so I'm just going to let things kind of percolate. Thank you so much, Bird Cell. I agree. It's worth every penny. In fact, I can't believe what a good deal it is. Uh, I'm pulling up my quick tip master list because I'm thinking, how do we move forward here? We've gone 3 years. We're living in a post COVID world now. You know, when this Patreon started, it was December 14th, 2020, and I was living in the city of Los Angeles. And I remember looking at the county maps of California and just seeing where you were based on the colors, and we were just in the deep purple. Deep, deep purple. There was so much COVID, and I said, well, I guess now's a good time to start a Patreon because we're not going anywhere. Now we can sort of go places. How do we move forward 3 years from now? Maybe you can give me suggestions. Are there more tiers for the Patreon that would actually be worth the money and time? There's that fine line with Patreon. You don't want to get what they call the creator burnout, where you can't produce with the frequency you advertise, and then you burn out and everybody loses. A quick tip every 2 weeks, that's something I can keep up with. That's something I'm looking forward to for the next 3 years. All right, let me interrupt my flow here. And I'm just looking over the quick tip master list, which as of most recently was updated up to 86, I'm sorry. We're going to reach, I think, quick tip 93 or 92 this Friday. Oh, Mike, that's a great question. I'm going to answer that in just a second. Quick tips began with simplify fiddle tunes. Quick tip number 1, introducing this idea of skeletalizing the melody. Not original at all, but I talk about it all the time. It's kind of one of the pillars of the quick tip stuff. Quick tip number 2, explore open position. I remember putting this out. It must be like a 5-minute quick tip. How could you explore the open position in 5 minutes? You can't. And the illusion that these are quick tips, by the way, is exactly that, an illusion. 5 minutes for a lifetime's of work right there. So maybe I should do some more tips on exploring open positions. Because as I think about it going forward, there's not much more knowledge that would be, I think, worth it to the general public. I mean, we're not going to talk about, you know, well, it's already gotten, a lot of these quick tips have already gotten pretty obscure. Quick tip number 5, diving the deep end, 1-string fiddle tunes. If you remember, we already kind of rehashed that a little bit in quick tip like 80. Yeah, 81, kind of rehashed that, but from a different context. And I think that's a lot of what we'll be looking at in the next 3 years is a lot of same stuff, but presented from a different angle. Because honestly, for example, if you're looking at the skeletal melody, sure, I've done, like, let's say 2 quick tips. Quick tip number 1, and I think it was quick tip number 65. It dealt exactly with skeletal. But as far as I'm concerned, you need to skeletalize 15 times over to even begin to understand the concept and the application of skeletalizing. It's not just like, oh, cool, I did it once. That was pretty interesting. No, it has to go way deeper than that. And even now, I still struggle skeletalizing stuff. But I just have faith that the few times that I've gone deep on one tune, it sort of has broadened the thing by, 0.3%. And that's a pretty significant percentage. So there will be more things on skeletalizing, is what I'm trying to say. One thing I'm thinking about lately is that I think a lot about slow improvisation. And, oh yeah, just go slow. It'll eventually come through. But there's a few things that you can immediately start trying to put up to speed. And I think skeletal melodies is one of them. Because you can make skeletal melodies of something that's really fast and make it into a half-note skeleton and still be able to sink your teeth in it. even as a beginning player, right? Because if you're playing something at 280 beats per minute and you're dealing with half notes, it's manageable. You don't have to go, right? So that could be an interesting way, and I'm giving away some of the future quick tips here, but that's what we do in the celebration. That could be a way of starting to really feel those high tempos in a practical and objective way. Because there's this kind of thing that I try to eliminate, which you can't eliminate, unfortunately, but it's like this kind of magical, like, okay, who knows what's going to happen now in the improv zone? That's kind of like what we all want, but I think I speak for a lot of people, myself included. Sometimes that's what I'm most afraid of. It's like, okay, here I go. Here's the part where I improvise, and all the stuff I've practiced for 6 years is not going to land anywhere close to this improvisation. So I'll feel like I just wasted the past 6 years. You could start trying to play the skeletal melodies in all positions at the high tempos. And can you really recall, hear, and feel those melodies at the high tempos? Even if you can't necessarily shred them down, you'll be able to at least hang on these melodies. So that's interesting. And if you study with me privately, sometimes we do this stuff and then, it kind of drops off after 2 weeks. But, what would happen if you really stuck with a tune for like a month straight? Most people don't want to do that, though. They say, you know what? Let's do something else. Okay. I think, Mike, to answer your question, of moving modes around the neck with a cage system, I don't think that's overthinking at all. I think that's exactly what I like to do. So the cage system is analogous to what I think of with my position 2E and all that stuff. So 2E for major is going to be, I think, the E position for caged. 2D is going to be the D position for caged. So yeah, some of the Patreon exclusive quick tips, which exist right around between maybe 58 to 63 zone, I believe, are all about modes and fingerings. Here's the shortcut. For modes, let's say in the major scale, there's 7 modes. We already figured out one mode with just doing the major scale in 5 positions, the caged system, if you want to call it that. I just do the fingerings for all the other ones using the exact same thing. So my 2E major becomes my 4E Dorian. Same exact fingering. The fingering works. Why mess with the fingering? Yeah, it's the same notes, but now it's got to be a brain exercise. I have to reframe the whole thing, and that's why I like that triads thing I started out talking about. You're seeing it the same way, but you're feeling that root there, not there. And then I go through all the positions and do the same thing. My 2D for G becomes 4D for Dorian. I think that answers your question, Mike. And I don't think it's overthinking it at all. I think it's just signing up for a ton of work, which, by the way, I think you'd enjoy doing, having done a few lessons with you. So yeah. Joseph, you say, I often worry that I'm limiting myself with flat picking. I'm not sure what to make of these feelings. I would try to interpret that question the way that I'm understanding it, which is flat picking being the genre where we're playing fiddle tunes, bluegrass, and things like that, it's pretty limited. It's a pretty niche thing. And um, yes, it can feel limiting, but it's only as limiting as you want it to be. So, one of the things that interests me is a lot of things. And one of the contexts, the main context that I operate in, is bluegrass and flat picking. There's no reason you can't integrate those two things. So when I like something, that's one of the reasons I like to use, and people like to use fiddle tunes as these vehicles to like just improvise and jump off on, which we've talked a lot about. Which we've talked a lot about in the quick tips. Um, and at a certain point, if the context of flat picking doesn't if the context of flat picking doesn't satisfy the thing you're interested in exploring, well, that's okay. Then you just go beyond the flat picking because you really wanted to explore that thing. But the want to explore that thing will be so strong that you won't even have to think about the fact that you're not flat picking anymore. And by the way, it's like, what is flat picking? It's just like putting the pick through a guitar on a flat top guitar. You know, guitar is the most versatile instrument. It's in like every style. So, I like flat picking as the reason I like it is because it's really accessible to all sorts of musical levels. You get people who've only been playing chords for a month. They've just picked up the guitar. Boom, they're in the jam. They're playing Blue Ridge Cabin Home. In that same jam could be somebody who just got off of a festival stage and is playing at the highest level of the thing. And that to me is not. I'm not talking. I'm not trying to be sentimental about it. Actually, I just think it's a really practical thing about this music, where you can get a feeling for what it's like to play with really good people, not knowing very much. So there's this nice exchange that can happen that'll make you want to actually learn quite a bit of stuff. And nowadays, it's like, look at a lot of the great pros. Like, they're playing all sorts of styles. Alex Hargraves and the Billy String Band. That guy could play any jazz tune you give him in a very musical, stylistically appropriate way. How exciting is that? Um, you know, so you'll see him break out into some John Coltrane thing. Boom. It's like, oh, okay. If he can do it on the fiddle, I could probably translate that to the guitar. Oh, wait, there's a whole tradition that's already been doing this on the guitar for a while. Boom. Rabbit hole entered, explore now. Then you come back and you play Red Haired Boy. Maybe a little trickle of this Coltrane thing will pop in. Cool. Nate, a workshop on tablet edit. I think I'd be very underqualified to do it. But yeah, I'm also happy in our private lessons to just go through some tablet edit if you get the program yourself. Here we are celebrating 3 years of Patreon. Yeah, Mike. It's not just that you have time on your hands. It's also even people with time on their hands don't necessarily want to go through playing five positions. It takes a certain type of person. You know, once you break the barrier of enjoying something like scale practice, it's it's a wonderful, infinite, fruitful world. But a lot of people, it's tough when you can play a nice melody like East Tennessee Blues and sound really good and pro. You might not be quite as inclined to sit around and play the Lydian scale, but maybe when you figure out that if you could put some Lydian vocabulary into the East Tennessee Blues, well, maybe you'll be more excited about it. I remember I went into some sort of Lydian zone for about 2 or 3 weeks into the summer. And, well, that's about my attention span these days. A hard time staying focused and drilling down deep on a single song. Yeah, I would say set up a little goal. So yeah, at first staying on one song for a month might seem pretty dreary, and it can be dreary. But I don't know what time scale you're talking about. I don't know exactly what time scale you're talking about, Craig. But if you have a tough time staying for a week with a tune, try seeing what it takes to come up with a pretty regimented plan for 5 days. And that to me is just because sometimes it takes time to build that kind of endurance up, and that's sort of a fun and encouraging thing. You say, okay, I've got this plan. And for me, for example, right now it's extremely specific. If I want to practice guitar, it has to be sometime between 12 and 3 p.m. plus or minus, well, no, minus 45 minutes on either end of that because of the way my life works. So I know for 5 days I'm going to have this exact thing. Now I need to take out like my little emotional sways of like, oh, I just saw that fun YouTube video that tells me that I've been doing everything wrong, so I can check that out. Cut that out of your life. Stop watching YouTube videos. Uh, you know, I'm making a quick tip on that. Just stop watching YouTube videos. It's the most distracting thing. And just see what it takes for 5 days to dive deep and decide on a sort of plan. And it has to be manageable within that because you don't want to push yourself too much because then you'll drain. You say, that didn't work. It's stupid. So depending on where you're at, Craig, I would say, learn a tune and say, what does it take to learn it in 2 or 3 positions? If that takes 5 days, just see what happens. Now, ideally, you have a sort of like supplemental thing to sort of just keep the fun zone going. So maybe you have like some sort of jam to look forward to or something like that. And if you don't, even just having an improvisation by yourself that you can record and listen to after, like later in the day when you're doing something that's not related to practicing, just to sort of hear where you're at. I think that's a good plan. And the more objective and specific your plan can be, the easier it'll be to stick to it. Sometimes I find one idea to keep you on track for this is having some help from the outside. If you have a friend, even if they live really far away, but they're interested in music, maybe you met them at a camp or something, set up a time to meet every 2 weeks and just tell them what you're working on. And it's amazing to me if you have this kind of accountability that maybe you want to present something in 2 weeks even if it's just a fraction of something, you're much more likely to try and follow through with it. Just setting up some sort of external accountability. And then the plan also gives me solace on the, there's just so many days where it's a bad practice day. You feel like you're going nowhere, but that's okay. If you did some objective thing, you're doing triads in the 2E position. You can't get all the way through 7. Okay, but master the first 2 or 3. Good. That's the tangible goal for the day. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I think it helps to have, that's why teachers can be good, because you might not just have a bad practice day, you might have a bad practice week, you might have a bad practice month. But if you kind of have this external thing keeping you there, it'll get you through those patches. And it's like, that's the way it works. You can't just be like doing awesome all the time. Another thought on that too is that not all practice has to be depth work. That's a lot of what we talk about in quick tips. But like, if you're just kind of new to the style and you don't have, and you're really interested, for example, in bluegrass jamming, and you don't have 30 to 40 tunes kind of under your belt, you need to catch up a little bit. So moving on to shiny new song after shiny new song to build up your repertoire is not actually, it's not that that's a bad thing either. So that's a nice thing that I kind of have in check. And you can do both things. And if you make a plan within that, this week I'm going to learn a Bela Fleck tune. And at the same time, I'm going to stick on the plan of Big Sandy River. Joseph, why is Big Sandy River killing you? Open mics are awesome as an external thing. Mike, you said it's hard to narrow it down and focus. Use the open mic. Try and see if you can have a set list of 3 or things or whatever, and use that as your thing. If one of the 3 tunes is Slipstream by Bela Fleck, and you make a plan that you're really going to practice the Dorian scale when you're starting improvising that tune, and you're really going to implement that the second you get up there and play, much more likely to go for it. And even on the off days, you say, well, maybe tomorrow Dorian will light up better, but day after tomorrow, I got to show up to that open mic. Yeah, the B part of the Big Sandy River is very difficult. That's how I play it. Oh, nice. Jerusalem Ridge next Tuesday. That'll be a good Dorian practice. For those of you just joining us, here we are celebrating 3 years of Patreon with Stash Weisslouch. Projections for the next 3 years. Well, for starters, very exciting in 2024. You will notice the video quality is going to get much, much better. So, that's an exciting thing to look forward to. We're not exactly adding new camera angles quite yet, but hey, maybe if we get up to that 200 patron number, we can afford a new camera. That'd be pretty cool. The quick tips in the next year, the next 3 years, I imagine will be a lot of rehashing from different angles because you can only cover so many things in music. You can only reinvent the wheel so many times. And I just think it's valuable. I can always come back and try to figure out a new way to get from a D7 chord to an E flat 7 chord. It's the same chord tones. And yet somehow I still can't do it confidently, knowing all that theory. I need to attack this from 7 different ways. 7 different quick tips generate themselves. Despite the fact that just by looking at quick tip number 70, you will find a pretty fail-safe way to navigate chord tones all over the guitar neck. How can current Patreon members and Stash aficionados help to achieve your goals for Patreon? That's a good question, Nate. A wonderful question, in fact. And one is you can give me confidence to ask for more. Because there's a funny thing with the old Patreon. There's a certain, which, for those who run mailing lists and stuff, is you don't want to send out too many things. And it's tough to get, well, the short answer is if I send out too much stuff, I notice a certain decrease in the amount of patrons. So there's an interesting balance, but maybe that's why I need to consult people who are in fundraising to sort of find that balance so I can achieve higher quality goals like you're talking about. So for starters, what I'm going to try to do is make better video content. And get on par with some of my colleagues who are also making great videos out there who have much better video and audio quality than I'm able to give right now. Oh, that's a good idea. Well, I need to get off of here pretty soon to teach another lesson. Yeah, Kenny, I think maybe it's not a direct. Oh, that's a good idea for a tip jar. That's a good point, for the well, it's more like, sometimes you forget that you subscribe to something and then they send you an email and you say, "Oh yeah, that's right. I've subscribed to that and I need to unsubscribe." before I have to go teach this next lesson, any other musical questions that I can maybe help you out with? There's so much information out there. In direct opposition to my interests, I will say everybody should watch less music videos these days because there's just too much information out there. And so many videos start with, "You're doing this the wrong way." Oh, thank you, Mike. I'm glad they serve that. I do the same myself sometimes. I say, what did I talk? Not all of these quick tips are practiced through and through. For example, syncopation and fiddle tunes, quick tip 59. I put that one together out on the fly. Hey, Jambone Jim, am I familiar with British guitarist Derek Bailey? Absolutely. One of my favorite guitar players ever. Totally changed the guitar for me and for the rest of the world. Yeah, I just think it's so cool. I think his book, Improvisation, I think it's just called Improvisation, is, yeah, here it is. Improvisation by Derek Bailey. Just an awesome book, and I recommend it to everybody here. There's just so many great little tidbits. They go into kind of just like short little overviews of stuff. Indian music, flamenco, baroque, organ music, jazz, of course, rock, the audience. There's a whole part on playing solo, which I really loved. But yeah, I really recommend this book. Yeah, one thing I got out of that book, actually, that I've sort of talked about in some of these quick tips is he talks about the way he got into his style and how he would just take a 3-note motif and just really play with it, in like the style of like Webern or something, and just try to get all the different ranges, all the transpositions, all the different permutations of it. And I remember reading that and being like, that's how you practice atonal free improvisation stuff. That's so cool. It's like a method, something you can like, sink your teeth into. It's not just like random stuff. And then of course you go back and listen and you hear like, oh yeah, he'll just be hanging out and he'll be playing. And then all of a sudden he's going, and you're like, oh, he just hit a harmonic. No, he's just hitting the first note of the motif. And then he'll go, and then a B flat would be like here. Whoops. There it is. All right, what is it? So cool. Joseph, the type of guitar I'm playing is called an Outlier Workshop, built by a guy named Ben Pierce, who lives now in Cambridge, Massachusetts. When he built this, he lived in Providence, Rhode Island. It's a wonderful guitar. I've had it since March 2009. It's got a lot of love, a lot of wear and tear, a lot of not wiping it down. You see people sometimes, they're putting the guitar away and they're just kind of wiping it down. I'm just like, oh yeah, that's what I was supposed to do. Before I just wore out. Oh, you can't really see, but this whole thing is worn out. Okie dokie. Well, this is fun. Thanks everybody for joining. Thank you for being a patron. If you are a patron, on patreon.com/StashWhiteSlouch. Projections for the next 3 years is widening the scope of many of the existing quick tips. Probably not much immediate new information because everybody's got enough of that. out the wazoo, and hopefully, we'll just look at things over and over and renew all that information again and again and again. Because no matter how much I've practiced the major scale, the harmonic minor scale, I still have that nagging feeling that I don't know either of them at all. That's not a bad thing. It's just more excitement to explore. All right, I'm off to teach a Rage Against the Machine song to a student. Have a wonderful time. See you at the next Patreon workshop if you're a patron. If you're not, please consider becoming one. Ciao, ciao.